This video contains discussions of child abuse. Viewer discretion advised. February 25, 2000. A 999 call pierces through the night in North London. Paramedics race to a freezing flat in Tottenham. Inside, they find 8-year-old Victoria Climbié, unresponsive, hypothermic, covered in injuries from head to toe. She's already gone, and 12 different agencies knew she was in danger. Deliver these slowly, letting each number land. 12 agencies were contacted about her welfare. 4 hospitals treated her injuries. 2 police departments investigated reports of abuse. 128 injuries were found on her tiny body. 0 interventions saved her life. Victoria Climbié was just 8 years old, a bright, hopeful child from the Ivory Coast in West Africa. Her parents sent her to England with her great-aunt Marie-Thérèse Kouao, believing she'd receive a better education, better opportunities, a better life. Victoria trusted the adults around her. Every single one of them failed her. Today, we're uncovering every missed warning, every ignored sign, every systemic failure that allowed this tragedy to happen. This case changed Britain's child protection system forever. But for Victoria, those changes came too late. The first warning came just 3 months after Victoria arrived in England, and it was completely ignored. How could so many professionals miss so many signs? Victoria Climbié was born on November 2, 1991, in Abobo, a suburb of Abidjan in the Ivory Coast. She was one of 7 children, raised by her parents, Francis and Berthe Climbié, in a loving, close-knit family. Teachers described Victoria as bright, eager to learn, full of potential. In 1998, her great-aunt Marie-Thérèse Kouao visited the family. Kouao painted a picture of opportunity, of education in France, of a future Victoria could never have in West Africa. Victoria's parents trusted Kouao. She was family. They believed they were giving their daughter the chance of a lifetime. April 1999. Victoria, just 7 years old, arrived in the United Kingdom with Kouao. But the first red flag appeared immediately. Kouao had no legal guardianship documents. None. She told immigration officials that Victoria was her daughter. A complete lie. They stayed with Kouao's friend in London. Victoria was enrolled in school, and teachers noticed something almost instantly. She was withdrawn, quiet, different from the bright child her parents described. But these early warning signs, they were just the beginning. July 1999. Everything changed when Kouao began a relationship with a bus driver named Carl Manning. Victoria moved into Manning's 1-bedroom flat in Tottenham, North London. And this is when the torture began. Victoria was forced to sleep in an empty bathtub, wrapped in a plastic bin liner, her hands and feet bound with masking tape, sometimes tied up with a bicycle chain. She was denied food systematically, starved. She had no access to the bathroom, forced to soil herself in the tub. The abuse was relentless. She was beaten with coat hangers, wooden spoons, hammers, burned with cigarettes, scalded with boiling water poured over her body. Victoria Climbié was 8 years old, and she was being tortured in the heart of London. But Kouao was clever. She knew people were starting to notice. So she built a narrative. She told neighbors Victoria was possessed by evil spirits, that the child was difficult, self-harming, out of control. Kouao took Victoria to multiple churches for exorcisms. Religious leaders saw Victoria's condition, the injuries, the fear in her eyes, but they didn't report it. They believed Kouao's story about demonic possession. Kouao was manipulating everyone around her, and professionals would believe it. As Lord Laming's report would later state, Victoria was treated worse than a dog. She was starved, beaten, and left to freeze in a bathtub. And the people who were supposed to protect her believed her abusers instead. Victoria's teachers weren't the only ones who noticed something was wrong. In the next 8 months, she would be seen by doctors 4 separate times. And every single time, they sent her back to her abusers. Before we continue with Victoria's story, I need to ask something important. If you believe cases like this need to be told, not for shock value, but to expose system failures and save lives, please subscribe and hit the like button. Your support allows us to investigate these cases thoroughly and reach people who might recognize warning signs. Consider joining as a channel member or leaving a super thanks. These contributions directly fund our research into cases that demand justice for the most vulnerable. And please, share this video. Someone watching might recognize these warning signs and save a child. Now, let's continue with Victoria's story. July 14th, 1999. Just 3 months after arriving in England, Victoria was brought to Central Middlesex Hospital by Kouao. The diagnosis? A severe scabies infestation. But the doctor noticed more. Signs of malnutrition. Suspicious marks covering Victoria's small body. The hospital social worker did exactly what they should have done. They contacted Brent Social Services. This was the first chance to save Victoria. A full child protection investigation should have been launched immediately. Victoria should have been removed from Kouao's care while authorities investigated. But that's not what happened. The case was closed within days. The reason? Lack of resources. Poor communication between the hospital and social services meant Victoria slipped through the cracks. She'd been in the UK for only 3 months, and the system had already failed her. 10 days later, July 24th, Victoria was admitted to North Middlesex Hospital with scalding injuries to her face and body. Kouao's explanation? Victoria had scratched herself and then poured hot water on her own head. Let that sink in. A 7-year-old child. Self-harming to that extreme degree. Pediatrician Dr. Rossiter immediately suspected non-accidental injury. A social worker named Lisa Arthurworry was assigned to the case. Victoria was kept in hospital for 18 days. 18 days where she was safe. 18 days where authorities had time to investigate. A police investigation should have been launched. Victoria should have been removed permanently. Instead, Arthurworry accepted Kouao's explanations. Victoria was discharged, sent right back to her abusers. Why did it fail? Arthurworry was inexperienced. She had no proper supervision, and she later admitted something devastating. She was afraid of being accused of racism if she questioned Kouao too aggressively. Cultural sensitivity, misapplied, cost Victoria her life. August 1999. A social worker conducted a home visit to Manning's flat in Tottenham. This should have been straightforward. Interview Victoria alone. Assess the living conditions. Determine if she's safe. But that's not what happened. Victoria was never seen alone. A major protocol violation. Carl Manning was present throughout the entire visit. The atmosphere was intimidating. The flat was filthy. There were no proper sleeping arrangements for Victoria. The social worker should have recognized these red flags immediately. The home should have been deemed unsuitable. Victoria should have been removed. Instead, the social worker left without conducting a proper assessment. Why? Fear of confrontation, lack of training, another chance, gone. October 1999. Victoria was brought back to North Middlesex Hospital, again with scalding injuries. This time, Kouao's story changed. Now Victoria was possessed by evil spirits. She was hurting herself because of demonic influence. Doctors documented extensive bruising, burns covering her body. The child protection team was notified. This should have triggered immediate police intervention. An emergency protection order. Victoria removed that very day. What actually happened? The case was referred back to social services. No follow-up. No coordination. Why did it fail? Because there was no coordinated multi-agency response system. Hospitals, police, and social services weren't communicating effectively. Victoria was sent home. Again. November 1999. 2 separate hospital visits within 2 weeks. Both times, Victoria presented with injuries Kouao claimed were self-inflicted. Medical staff noted something crucial. Victoria was terrified of Kouao. But here's the problem. Victoria was never interviewed without Kouao present. Another protocol violation. An emergency protection order should have been issued immediately. Instead, both hospitals discharged Victoria back to Kouao. Why? Because there was no centralized database. The hospitals didn't know Victoria had already been to 4 different hospitals in 5 months. As Lord Lamming's report would later state, if there had been a national child protection register, doctors would have seen the pattern. 4 hospitals in 5 months. That pattern alone should have triggered immediate intervention. But there was no system, no database, no coordination, and Victoria paid the price. December 1999. 2 more chances to save Victoria. A housing officer noticed Victoria's deteriorating condition during a routine visit to Manning's flat. He reported his concerns to Haringey Social Services. Separately, an anonymous caller contacted the NSPCC hotline, reporting suspected abuse. Both reports should have been investigated within 24 hours. But the housing officer's report? Lost in the system. The NSPCC call? Not properly logged. Why did it fail? No accountability systems. Poor record-keeping. Bureaucratic chaos. 2 people tried to save Victoria. The system ignored them both. January 2000. Kouao took Victoria to multiple Pentecostal churches for exorcisms. Church leaders witnessed Victoria's injuries, her emaciated state, her obvious suffering. Pastor Pascal Orome saw Victoria tied up and covered in sores. At least 2 church members considered reporting what they saw. But they didn't. Why? Because clergy were not considered mandatory reporters in the UK at that time. There was no legal obligation, no clear guidance. Victoria was paraded in front of dozens of people who could have saved her. And no one did. February 23, 2000. 2 days before Victoria died. She was brought to North Middlesex Hospital for the 3rd time. She was hypothermic. Her body temperature was dangerously low. She was severely malnourished. At 8 years old, Victoria weighed only 3 stone, 42 pounds. She was covered in over 100 visible injuries. The doctors knew. They knew this was abuse. Kouao refused to allow Victoria to be admitted. The hospital had legal authority to detain Victoria for her safety. They could have kept her there, protected her. But they didn't. Fear of legal repercussions, lack of clear protocols. Kouao walked out of that hospital with Victoria. This was the last time anyone outside that flat would see Victoria Climbié alive. February 24, 2000. Victoria's condition was critical. Manning and Kouao did nothing. Victoria died alone in a bathtub, bound, freezing, in unimaginable pain. February 25th. Kouao finally called 999. Paramedics raced to the flat in Tottenham. They found Victoria in cardiac arrest. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. The post-mortem examination revealed 128 separate injuries covering her body. The cause of death? Hypothermia, multiple organ failure, from prolonged, systematic abuse. Victoria Climbié died because 12 different agencies failed her. But what happened next would expose just how broken the system really was. The investigation that followed would reveal something even more disturbing. Every single professional involved had documented their concerns. They had written reports, made phone calls, raised red flags. But the system was so broken, Those warnings never connected. February 24th, 2000. Victoria's condition was critical. Manning and Kouao did nothing. Victoria died alone in a bathtub, bound, freezing, in unimaginable pain. February 25th. Kouao finally called 999. Paramedics raced to the flat in Tottenham. They found Victoria in cardiac arrest. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. The post-mortem examination revealed 128 separate injuries covering her body. The cause of death? Hypothermia, multiple organ failure, from prolonged, systematic abuse. Victoria Climbié died because 12 different agencies failed her. But what happened next would expose just how broken the system really was. The investigation that followed would reveal something even more disturbing. Every single professional involved had documented their concerns. They had written reports, made phone calls, raised red flags. But the system was so broken, those warnings never connected. Immediate aftermath. February 25th, 2000. The same day Victoria died, Kouao and Manning were arrested at the hospital. Police immediately searched Manning's flat in Tottenham. What they discovered was a crime scene. Victoria's bedroom was a bathtub, the place where she died. Forensic teams found bin liners, bicycle chains, implements of torture. Neighbors began coming forward with testimonies. "We heard screaming," they said, "but we thought it was just discipline." Multiple witnesses admitted they suspected abuse, but they didn't report it. The charges: both Kouao and Manning were charged with murder. The evidence was overwhelming. 128 documented injuries. Victoria's body told the story her voice never could. The autopsy revealed systematic, prolonged torture. There was no single fatal blow. She died from cumulative abuse and neglect. The pathologist who examined Victoria said her injuries were among the worst he'd seen in 30 years. And he'd worked on serial killer cases. Prosecution case. January 2001, the trial began at the Old Bailey. The prosecution laid out a case of deliberate, sustained cruelty. Victoria had been starved, beaten, burned, left to freeze in a bathtub for months. Both defendants initially blamed each other, but the evidence showed both participated actively in the abuse. Defense attempts. Kouao claimed Victoria was possessed by demons, that she was trying to save the child's soul. Manning claimed he was afraid of Kouao, that he was manipulated. Both tried desperately to minimize their involvement. Critical moment. The jury saw photographs of Victoria's injuries. The trial lasted several weeks. The evidence was undeniable. The verdict. January 12, 2001. Both were found guilty of murder. They were sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge's statement was clear. What happened to Victoria was torture and murder. You are both evil. Minimum terms: life for Kouao, life for Manning. Justice was served, but it was too late. Victoria's parents, Francis and Bertha, traveled from the Ivory Coast for the trial. They had trusted their daughter to family. They never imagined she'd be tortured to death while dozens of professionals looked the other way. Why the inquiry mattered. The convictions weren't enough. Public outrage demanded answers. How did the system fail so catastrophically? The government ordered an independent inquiry. Lord Laming was appointed to investigate every single failure that led to Victoria's death. The findings. January 2003. The Laming report was published in January 2003. It contained 108 recommendations for reform. The findings exposed systemic failures at every level. Poor communication between agencies. Inadequate training for social workers. No centralized child protection database. Cultural sensitivity misapplied. Social workers were afraid of being called racist, so they didn't ask the hard questions. Lack of accountability and supervision. No mandatory reporting requirements for many professionals. Lord Laming's words were damning. Victoria's death was a gross failure of the system and was inexcusable. The suffering and death of Victoria was a terrible event. It should never have happened. The agencies with responsibility for Victoria gave a lamentable account of themselves. The reforms that followed. The government responded with sweeping changes. Every Child Matters, a government green paper published in 2003. The Children Act, 2004. Major legislative reform. Contact Point Database, a centralized tracking system to monitor vulnerable children. It was later discontinued but replaced with improved systems. Integrated Children's Services. Multi-agency cooperation became mandatory. Ofsted inspections of child protection services were implemented. Mandatory training for social workers, teachers, and medical staff. Clear escalation protocols when concerns are raised. The legacy. Victoria's case became a textbook example in social work training across the UK. Every child protection worker in the country knows her name. Annual reviews of child protection systems were mandated. Funding for social services increased, at least initially. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Despite all these reforms, children still fall through the cracks. Baby P, Peter Connolly, died in 2007, in the same borough that failed Victoria. The system improved, but it's still not perfect. Victoria's death changed laws, but did it actually save lives? The answer might surprise you. What we must remember. There are lessons from Victoria's case that we all need to remember. Trust your instincts. If you suspect abuse, report it. Don't assume someone else will act. Every report matters. Cultural sensitivity should never override child safety. And remember, systems are only as strong as the people operating them. How to recognize child abuse. Unexplained injuries, especially patterns of bruising or burns. Fear of specific adults or caregivers. Sudden behavioral changes, withdrawal, aggression, or fear. Poor hygiene or signs of malnutrition. Withdrawal from activities they once enjoyed. Reluctance to go home. If you suspect abuse, in the UK, call the NSPCC helpline at 0808 800 5000 or contact your local social services. In the US, call the Child Help National Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Internationally, contact your local child protection services. And here's something important. You can report anonymously. You might think you're overreacting. You might worry about being wrong. But Victoria Climbié died because people stayed silent. Don't be one of them. Victoria Climbié was 8 years old. She loved to sing. She dreamed of becoming a nurse. She trusted the adults around her to keep her safe, and every single one of them failed her. Her death wasn't meaningless. The reforms that followed have saved lives. Social workers are better trained. Agencies communicate more effectively. The system improved. But it's still not enough. Children still die from abuse. Systems still fail. Which is why we must never stop demanding better. Victoria's story is a reminder that child protection isn't just the responsibility of social workers or police. It's all of us. If you see something, say something. Because the next Victoria Climbié might be saved by your call. Rest in peace, Victoria. Your voice was silenced, but your story will never be forgotten. If this case affected you, please consider subscribing. We cover the stories that expose systemic failures and demand justice for the most vulnerable. New cases every week. Thank you for watching, and thank you for caring.